Hi there, Dave here with a video about, well, the first working version of our Flight Log 1 project. So go ahead and bring it up. The file that we worked on in class, since this is the in-class version, is the 1D, the in-class 1D. So that was the one that finally had the report. And the report that we're talking about is, once again, going back to the design. We look at the design, and this is the report. And we notice that there are, in fact, only 2 of the 5 sites that were used, so only 2 of the 5 sites appear. Like it says, the site report only shows those sites that have flights. So in class we went through the logic of what that means when we look at the arrays. And we looked at the arrays and we saw that there were 5 arrays. Sure enough, at the end of the execution of in-class flight log 1C, and only 2 of those had the data. And so we knew that we had to ask whether there was a flight first. And if there was, then we went ahead and took the total distance for the number of flights and divided it by the number of flights. So we're keeping the total distance and we're keeping the number of flights. And we talked about that logic, and then we finally implemented it down here at the bottom. So we talked about the fact that this is just standard ways of doing stuff. When you process, you do something at the beginning, then you do something usually over and over in the middle, and then when you're all done, you do something at the end. And sure enough, that's exactly what we're doing here. We're setting some stuff to zeros, initializing some stuff, declaring some stuff in our pseudocode. And then we're going through all of the arrays. And when we look at a particular element in the array, if the total count for that element is greater than 0, that means there was activity. So go ahead and do these next 4 lines. First line says calculate the average, and the second line says print that average along with the name of the site and the count. So we're calculating the average, then printing it, and then going ahead and incrementing the grand total count by 1 and the distance count by the value in the total distance subindex, that particular bucket of the total distance array. So we're calculating the average, printing the line, and then adding to the correct array bucket for that particular site. Now, if we do that or we don't do that, we're going to go through the index. So we're always going to add 1. So even if we did not print that line, we're going to go to the next. If we did print the line, we're going to go to the next. Under all circumstances, the next line to be executed either after, let's go look at our line numbers here. The next line number after 221 is going to be 222. The next line after 217, if the question is answered by no, false, then the next line is going to be 222. And under the circumstances that we've gone through all of the members of the array, and that's the point at which index is not going to be less than the length of the total members of the array, when we're done, then we're going to come down and we're going to say, okay, is the grand count greater than 0? If it is, then go ahead and calculate that final average. If it's not, then you can't calculate that final average, so go ahead and just print total Yeah, the count you can print, but you got to put your zeros there because otherwise you're going to blow the thing up dividing by 0. So things that we have to do to take into consideration the fact that things might not be perfect. And we haven't taken all those things into consideration, but we're doing better. Let's take a look at another change that we made, another major change. Up at the top now, in middle, we might want to move some of this stuff around, and we will in the next refactoring, which will be in the next version we'll do Monday in class. So here's the middle, and this middle guy has changed. Yep. Now what we do is we can take in as many sites, we can take in as many flights, from any sites that are in our thing, right? We can take in as many flights as we want. Because what we do is we take in our site and distance information at the beginning, and then we say, hey, if I got something, in other words, if the length of the site is greater than 0, if you gave me something back, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, is it valid? And if it's valid, go ahead and add to the total. Otherwise, print that this is invalid. But notice what I do next is I get the next site. The getting of the next site is at the bottom of the loop. So we get one to begin with, and then if that's valid, then we go ahead and do what we were going to do, and at the bottom of that loop we get the next site and distance. And then we're going to go up and test it, right? We're going to make sure that, hey, if its length is greater than 0, then we're going to continue. So the key here and the change that we made in order to make this whole thing work really slick was to put the while after we got the first input. So we get the first input, then we check to see if it's valid, and if it is, then we go ahead and do what we were going to do anyway, which is this stuff. And then when we get done with that, we go ahead and get the next input so that we can test it again to see whether we should continue. That allows us to loop through this as many times as we want. All right. I think those were the two major changes, and certainly I think we had to make a couple more changes for if this didn't work right or that. We're going to do some refactoring next time. But the important part to look at was this display. I think the important thing to look at is this, once again, this idea that we have a beginning where we set a bunch of stuff up, do the beginning stuff, the heading stuff, the column headings, and then we iterate through our data. Go through our data, doing what we need to do as we go through it and go through it and go through it. Then when we're all through iterating through our data, we come down here and we usually do something at the end. And in this case, we're printing a total. So we print the title at the top, set the totals to 0, go through it, adding to our totals as we're going through it. At the back, we print the total stuff. And in the middle, we have that stuff. Very, very typical way of doing things. And you're going to see this pattern again and again for the rest of the term. So we'll fix things up on Monday, and we'll be done with this version of Flight Log 1. Take care.